everybody. My topic today is bridging the competence gap, empowering seafarers through immersive training solutions. I wanted to start with saying every year brings new regulations and technologies to shipping, but I think he demonstrated that far better than I could. We know cargo, engine and bridge operations become more complex. All this often leads to what people are talking about as a skill or competence gap. But on the other hand, we have so many great new learning technologies. We have AI, VR, simulator training, all that, and still we have this gap. So I want to have a look into this and find out how we can support the upskilling and future-proofing of global crews to help them become our crew of the future. As I said, my name is Marvin Bielek. I'm working for MINTRA as an instructional learning designer. My background is as a nautical officer, and I always had a passion for navigational safety, which for me starts with the design process, be it from the bridge layout, software interface, or now training design. So let's have a look where this perceived competence gap actually comes from. Just this year, we saw as an example the implementation of the EU emission trading system, the EU ETS, which is pushing the implementation of new tools to reduce fuel consumption and even of new fuel types altogether. The EU ETS creates a carbon market with the aim to make low-emission shipping more economically viable. And together with the IMO regulations like EEXI, CII, which aim to improve the technical and operational performance of ships, and actually with even more regulations upcoming, as the IMO aims for a 50% reduction of fuel consumptions on all vessels. So all these green technologies, they drive new developments and they drive alternative fuels. And this transition is already underway within our maritime industry. Half the ordered tonnage is now capable of using LNG, LPG or methanol in dual fuel engines, compared to only 1/3 of the tonnage that was ordered last year. And further to that, other fuels like ammonia and hydrogen are being discussed, and even nuclear is discussed as an option. But the infrastructure and the availability of these alternative fuels is limited, and shipping is competing with other industries. So in the meantime, we're continuing to see the use of other means to reduce fuel emissions and to improve fuel efficiency. That's a recent DNV forecast, and it gave us a nice overview of various tools that are either already in use or are in discussion. And all of these developments, they result in turn in many additional competencies needed for the engine department. Meaning it's tipping the scale and it's starting to create this competency gap because people suddenly need to know new things, additional things. But of course, the need for competencies is not limited to the engine department and not limited to green shipping. So everybody here in the audience, I believe, will know a point or two. I want to give you one example: underwater inspections. Classically, these were done by divers in port, meaning specified people coming there, specialists, to check the rudder, propeller, underwater ship. But nowadays, new drones make it easier than ever. These are ROVs, remotely operated vehicles. They can be used to inspect the ship without the risk of diving and without a specialized operator. That means the crew can do it themselves. They can use it to check the ship themselves, and that has many advantages, of course. It's much more flexible, they can do it when they need it, they are more in control, they can use their time at anchorage, for example, if possible. They're easy to use, these ROVs, but the crew needs to learn to use them. So that's another weight on them, on their side of the scale. Next example, data-driven decision-making. It's a huge topic, often also called big data. It can include various tools, such as advanced monitoring systems, integrated bridge systems, which leads to real-time analytics of the ship and of the environment, quite often with the aim to improve the performance of the ship. But especially older ships, they are not immediately equipped for this kind of data gathering. So they may use additional equipment, for example, wireless mesh networks, to facilitate data gathering. And most of these tools individually, they're not very complex, but they're various tools and they're added on top of each other. So again, they add to the skill requirement. And I don't want to say they don't have undeniable advantages. They do. That's why they're being used in the first place, and there's nothing to say against it. But at the same time, we need to ensure that seafarers can handle all that. And besides these technical tools, of course, there is a vast amount of regulations upcoming in the next years. That's just a small overview of the core IMO regulations upcoming, SDCW, SOLAS, etc. But that's by far not the only thing. There are more external requirements too. There are things like vetting requirements, flag or port state requirements, specific charterer requirements, and even requirements for specific areas. They all have their raison d'être, they all have their reason to be, because often they are improving the safety of shipping, as other existing regulations are lacking, or they're just behind the times because they can't keep up with technological development just yet. So, all of that, it's a lot to consider for one ship. But it's very rare for a seafarer to be assigned to the same vessel all the time. If they're lucky, they're assigned to similar sister vessels. But especially in international shipping, it's quite common to be assigned to vastly different ships. And then, hopefully for the seafarer, they're also going to be promoted at one point. Which is why many companies start to use tools to track the different competencies through ranks, through roles, such as ship and rank-specific competency profiles, promotion checklists, or matrices. Everything to keep track of all the requirements and to ensure that the people they are sending on the board are actually competent in that role. So, that sounded a little bit negative. Enough of the negativity. Because, as I said, there are also new learning tools and technologies, and they can help counter that. There is development on that side of the scale also. And I'm very happy to show you some of the development there, but also to focus on why it's so important to implement it correctly into training. One example, AR and VR, extended reality. They're gaining a lot of traction. There's an estimated 1.4 billion users of AR devices globally, not just within shipping, but still. And AR is a great learning tool because it's not just used in training. It can be used on the job to support you directly, which is also an important part of learning. And 63% of companies that adopt AR are using it for learning. That's just an example. We have far more tools. We also have simulators, digital learning, micro-learning, interactive courses, and one of the most dominant new tech terms of the last year, of course, AI. So all of this can definitely help in learning. Shouldn't it be easy to close the competence gap with all that? Some people praise AI in that kind of way, but none of these tools can magically solve all our problems. I want to look with you guys into one example in a little bit more detail. Simulator training. Traditionally speaking, the main providers of simulators were education institutes. They had full engine or full bridge simulators, and they were using it in formal programs, as well as to upskill people already in companies. And then at one point, some of these institutes started also using cloud simulators, so their students could practice flexibly. But the institutes designed and provided their own exercises for all that. And then during the pandemic, companies started using cloud simulators directly, because the logistics to attend a classroom course became a nightmare, and some institutes even had to close down completely. But the companies by themselves, they lacked this kind of training content. They lacked the specific exercises that the institutes had. And that is the implementation gap. It needs expertise with training design to actually implement all these learning technologies, all these solutions. And due to the vast range of topics, we're going to see in a second what we are covering as courses in maritime, it's hard to have all this expertise within a shipping company. Sure, for this specific example, there may still be institutes out there that can cooperate with companies, and they can provide simulator exercises and guidance. But that is exactly the kind of expertise that I'm talking about, that it's needed. Let's have a quick look at the second example. VR, virtual reality training, another big buzzword of the last years. We recently did a study that really showed that interactivity and authenticity are essential for learning. And VR is a great way to immerse learners and to create interactive content. But if you look at the most used courses in maritime, we have a wide range, from SOPEP or enclosed space on the top to mental and physical health. And just adding VR on top of these courses doesn't solve the competence gap. Honestly, it might not even help to reach the learning outcomes of that course. For mental health or maritime leadership, for example, they don't really profit from AR. So how do you actually put VR on these courses? Simply that, you don't. You don't just put VR on top of a course. You have to fully design a course for VR. You have to match it from the basic design, from the learning content and outcomes to the interactive assessment. In this example that we can see here, we used a 360-degree photography of an existing bridge, and we fully designed the course to make use of what VR has to offer. To learn about bridge alert management with a focus on relating the different information, such as categories, types, and priorities of alerts, to the physical locations of the bridge. So we didn't just add VR to a classic course. We analyzed the topic. We analyzed the learning outcomes needed, the different tools available, and the learning solutions. And then we came to the conclusion that for this specific topic, it can really profit from this specific tool, from VR and from this kind of media. And then we designed the whole course to have all that in mind, making use of the interactivity that walking around on a bridge gives us. So, can we bridge the competency gap? Of course we can, with expertise and with tailored content, with matching the right technology to the right learning content, and with designing the content to really use what the technology has to offer. The results will be effective training for a safer shipping. It will be value added, it will be training times well spent, and it can tip the scale and even out the competency gap. But it needs expertise, and it doesn't just happen magically by itself. Thank you all for listening.